Hi guys, thanks for being here with us. My name's Brett Lyle, and I am fortunate enough to be speaking with Tim Nowak this morning. How are you, Tim?
Excellent. How are you doing, Brett?
I'm well, thank you for asking. So Tim comes to us with years of experience. He is the founder and CEO of Emergency Medical Solutions, LLC. Actually, Tim, why am I talking about you? Tell us a little bit about your experience.
No problem. No, I appreciate it, and thank you so much for having me on with you. I've been involved in EMS since 2002, starting with the first responder program, bridging through EMT and then paramedic eventually, and started my own training consulting company, Emergency Medical Solutions, back in 2010. And really my reason for starting that, I had been involved in EMS and then education for my entire career. And the reason for starting the company was really just to change things up a little bit to capitalize on a market that wasn't being addressed, and that was flexible continuing education. And the opportunity kind of popped up, and I jumped on it. So I started my own company, and it's morphed into a number of different areas over the past 10 years, which is interesting. It's gone into areas that I didn't expect, but positively.
Sure.
And it's really helped to, I think, get me where I am with my career today. So aside from doing emergency medical solutions, which is really my part-time job, or job number two, which is job number 2, 3, and 4 of the 8 that we all have.
Right.
Full-time though, or at least during the day, I'm the new assistant chief of special operations with a county-based EMS system in Florida.
Sure.
So I've started my journey in Wisconsin, hence a little bit of the accent. Have jumped over to Colorado for the past 3 years, working in a hospital system with education, and then now I'm in the administrative role in Florida. So I'm all over the place.
Right. Well, I'm excited to talk to you about a lot of that. So thanks for being here with us today. For our listeners, my goal of this podcast really is to bring experts on. And I want to be really clear on that. Expert is somebody who has something to say that other people get value in. So leadership is, it's not a title. To me, it's a function, and it's a mentality. It's a mindset. And so Tim is clearly a leader in not only EMS, but healthcare. Obviously, as you heard, has a plethora of experiences that he brings to the table. So we're going to dive in today, talk a little bit about those, where he got to where he's going, and I think most importantly, to talk through the best practices and the lessons learned, so that as listeners, as we're listening to other people's experiences, we don't have to have those same exact 18 years, right? What can we take away today and be a little bit better for it? What action items? So we're going to close today out once Tim and I finish up talking through his journey, and he's going to share that with us with a little bit of value add for you at the end. So what are some of those lessons learned? So Tim, let's jump right in. So I'm excited to share with the listeners. I think, it's probably exciting for you too. You have how many followers on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so LinkedIn has been an interesting platform for me. I've tried working on social media with the Facebook side, but never really got into it, and found LinkedIn to be an interesting network platform, focusing more on professional discussion and just kind of targeted audiences. So I've been just connecting with people left and right. I don't by any means know a fraction of them, but I've got just shy of 15,000 connections on LinkedIn. And that ranges, 15,000 almost.
A couple connections, if you can say.
Yeah,
Bigger than maybe some towns in rural Florida.
No, certainly. So it's unique. I mean, by no means do I know a fraction of these people, and even you, Brett, a connection that I met on LinkedIn. I think this is the first time we've had a chance to actually speak or meet face to face, if that's the right way of putting it. So it's an interesting platform, and I think every part of social media has its ups, its downs, and advantages. And what I've found, at least through LinkedIn, is just a different level or caliber or type of discussion than the other platforms offer. And that's just the one I've chosen, and the one that I navigate and run with.
Sure. So it's interesting because, one of the things that I talk a lot about in my coaching is your personal brand. And how do you create it? It sounds a little bit intimidating, but your personal brand is really just how you represent yourself and what things you share with the world. So we're all so complex. Obviously, even just from a career experience perspective, You've got 4 different ventures that you're working on, right? So how did you decide and how do you navigate, Tim, what you share, what's going to add value to your audience? How do you decide that? Did you sit down one day and say, this is the thing I want to talk about on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So starting obviously with 0 connections, 1 connection, 2, 3, 5, 15, 200, that's the start for everyone. And what I wanted to get out of LinkedIn was that professional connection. And so what I more or less made a goal of mine to do is to connect with local people, connect with people throughout the country, and then find some of the targeted people, or people that I felt were targeted within the industry, that
Sure.
were thought leaders, that were big names. And my goal was to get them, within my connection.
The
And
network.
exactly, to network. And it's not, it's not just for the sake of having numbers. The number doesn't mean as much to me, even though I do track the numbers and see the data behind it. So I mean,
We all
now
track them. It's about
yeah,
the value that it brings to your life and the value,
yeah.
frankly, the value that you bring to that network is
Mhm,
also the value that network brings to you.
mhm. Yeah, so the numbers, yeah, they are important, but I don't lose sleep over the numbers. I mean,
Sure,
I remove people daily, and then I add people daily. So
sure,
uh, it keeps building up though. But
sure.
what I wanted to do, or my whole purpose behind networking on LinkedIn was exactly to do that, to network. I've got a lot of questions, and maybe it's the millennial in me or something, but I've got
Sure.
a lot of questions. And so I think part of the selfishness may not be the right word, but part of my own selfishness is I want to learn. I
Yeah.
want to learn, what did you do? When you had this scenario, what did you do that got you out of it? What did you learn that you failed on? Or
Mm-hmm.
what did you learn that you succeeded with? So that I maybe don't fall into the same trap, or I don't
Right.
replicate the same thing, and I can run with it.
Sure. Tim,
And oh, go ahead.
you said something that just resonated really strong with me. You said, when your curiosity, you kind of navigate. I think that's a very kind of EMS thing, right? Like, I'm
Mhm.
getting something value out of this, so it must be wrong.
Yeah.
And maybe people outside of the industry don't see that, but when you add value, and I'm sure I can say personally, and I'm sure your other people that follow you on LinkedIn would say the same thing, that the value that you bring to us is equally as valuable. And so it's not always about having the answers. In my experience, it's about asking the right questions. So
Exactly.
as you're curious, Tim, and you come across these things that you're fascinated with or you don't necessarily understand, you have that level of curiosity. I think fair to say, you're not probably alone. I mean, we're all very unique, independent individuals, but humans are very similar to one
Mhm.
another. And so your curiosities are going to resonate with somebody who has similar experiences or going through similar things. So in that, Tim, have you ever shared something that didn't maybe necessarily align with your brand, or something that you thought did? And you mentioned having to, adding people daily, but also deleting people. So how do you navigate that network to say this person is a solid connection? I mean, 14,500 people is a lot. Tell me about some of those experiences that you've had where you had to navigate those the
Eh,
difficulties of sharing and using your voice as a platform.
Absolutely. So, from the start of getting people, I certainly target who I connect with, or click submit or connect. And from my standpoint, though, that's a very loose criteria. I mean,
Sure.
if it's someone that is in EMS, if it's someone that's within the fire service, law enforcement, I don't have as many connections there just because it's not my industry. But
Mm-hmm.
fire, EMS, and then emergency management are probably my 3 areas that I have the most connections, EMS being the predominant one.
Right.
Um, so, if you've got firefighter, EMT, paramedic, whatever behind your name or within your job description, I'll hit submit or connect. And I mean, for the most part, connections stay. Everyone's level of activity is different. I would think that, there are probably 20 people that I interact with or see or get comments or feedback from quite regularly.
Mm-hmm.
But then every once in a while, there's that sleeper person that jumps in and throws in a comment,
Right.
and it's like, oh, where'd this person come from?
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
connected to you, so.
right. The LinkedIn algorithm is something I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. And so, I talk through some of that in my coaching as well, right? How to use LinkedIn to network. How do you use your network to be value and find value? And there's so many people on LinkedIn, social platforms in general, that people are active and engaging on. And I think it's a really unique place we're in the world where, yeah, you just said you and I have never met. This is, the first time we've ever seen each other face to face, and I consider you a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of conversations. And so do you have other examples of people that you've built relationships with? And how does that relationship building process work for you, just beginning in an online platform?
Yeah, and it is very unique, like you've mentioned, where these people I've never met them, aside from this type of distance platform. So, I certainly have, I think, built up some relationships with people and some reputation with them, and a network of trust, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that just comes from engagement, and
Right.
it comes from taking a chance. And one thing that's unique about what I've done with LinkedIn, at least, or kind of my mantra on LinkedIn, or my identity on there, is I think it's fair to say that I'm probably known as a person that's not afraid to ask questions. And it's very interesting. You actually won't see me post a whole lot about things,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not afraid to ask things.
Right.
And that's the one thing that I've found that was interesting was, okay, so initially, very early on, I had a lot of questions. So I'd ask the question, and I still have a lot of questions too. So by no means do the majority of the things I ask have a purpose to them. It's not like this happened to me, therefore I'm asking a question.
Right.
It's quite honestly like, oh, I woke up, I have a random question. So
Sure.
there's not necessarily, like, don't take offense to anything that I ever ask, because there probably isn't a reason for it.
Sure.
Some things there certainly are, but for the most part, this is purely a random question, and I'm just throwing it to everyone to ask.
Sure.
And that's the thing I found, though, is like a lot of people have something to say. They just don't want to be the first person to ask it. And it's almost like asking that question or being the first person to break the ice is the hardest part. And by no means, like, I am an introvert. I am not an extrovert. And my wife would attest to that, I'm sure. So I am very much an introvert, except for on this platform or within our industry. I will gladly be the first person to stand up or to speak or to ask a question or do something, engaging within the EMS industry. Outside of that, as far as a party, I'm just dead weight at a party. So I'm
Well, I'm sure you're not. You're lovely, but
oh no, yeah, no, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you said a few things. So I just heard you say that you took a chance.
Mhm.
Was the word you used. You take chances, and you alluded to earlier. Maybe it's the millennial in you, or in people who are curious. I think there's two things that you just hit on. One, being curious and asking the question generationally does not mean I say we, because I'm in that boat with you. I want to know why. I want to understand it. And it comes from that interest. And so when things are rooted in interest, as opposed to a kind of authoritative challenging. So what I'm hearing you say is you're asking the question because you're interested in learning and growing, bettering yourself, as opposed to challenging the process necessarily.
Mhm.
Now, if something comes about that and the process has been challenged because you found a best practice, I'm sure you'd be confident and comfortable saying that you're going to push that agenda forward. Am I right?
Absolutely. So one part of it is, yes, asking the question, being the first person to just start, just do something, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
wrong, just do something
Mm-hmm.
to promote that conversation. That I think is the starting point for it. Have I ever, going back to your first question, have I ever put my foot in my own mouth? Oh yeah, absolutely. Do I regret those situations? I regret parts of those moments. I've learned from them, so I don't regret that aspect of it. But I certainly have, and I've had a little bit more courage than I probably should have in certain situations, or been more bold than I should have been. And that's just a learning experience. We all
Right.
get those. Um,
Well,
so
I think that should word resonates hard with me too, right? Then I should have been, then I should have done. And I think sometimes those moments where we question whether we regret something or we say something and maybe even just wish we wouldn't have, they're learning opportunities. Have you ever read
yeah,
Failing Forward?
I have not. I'm not a big book reader. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, for our listeners who are, I would strongly suggest Failing Forward. It's a really great book, and it basically talks about the principle of how to be successful, and that you have to try it. You have to make those failures to recognize that they're a failure, and that level of self-reflection to come back and say, where did this go left field? Or where did this go hard right when I wanted it to be middle of the road? Or when I went hard left, what was the word I used that took me there, right?
Yeah.
And so that level of self-reflection and personal introspection. So for somebody who's more of an introvert, I'm sure you're not. That's not a foreign concept to you. Is that analytical side? Is that from everything that we do, we grow and we learn. So I'm curious to know, Tim, as you've been on LinkedIn necessarily, even in this magazine, and you're putting out articles and you're publishing things and you're navigating, helping other people find a voice. Because I would argue you've become a mentor and a great example to a lot of people who are afraid to put themselves out there and to take that risk. You've become an example for them. Are there any things that you've learned in your experiences navigating your voice that you've taken with you in your professional career working for the county or working in the EMS systems, or vice versa?
Absolutely. So certainly the posts that I do make, the questions that I do ask, I learn from them, and I like the conversations. I try to engage in the conversations and certainly take them in. And I think that has built up a knowledge bank in my own mind, selfishly, but appreciatively, that I've been able to at least, I may not have been able to experience that exact problem directly, but I can pull it up from, okay, this person, I remember them mentioning something about it, and that I think is beneficial.
Right.
So it helps me certainly to get more experience, and I think everyone else too, in that same right. And going back to what you had mentioned, as far as if something is not right, being unafraid to stand up and even disrupt a little bit. I'm comfortable doing that. Now, there can be consequences with doing that, and you've got to be willing to accept the consequences sometimes if you do stand up. But that is a risk, or maybe not risk is the right word, maybe a calculated decision is a more appropriate word. And through all of that, and through building up that brand online, I've been able to be known as someone that can ask questions, and it's not atypical for me to ask a question. Actually, it's unique where I would say at least monthly, if not every other week, I have someone private messaging me to ask a question on behalf of them. So some of the questions I do ask are directly related to someone who has a question, can't ask it because of the identity that they have, and I do it through me, just because it's not out of the norm. So that's an advantage. With the magazine, though, I think one of my goals with that was certainly to open up that platform. It's a grassrooted effort magazine that I started initially in 2014, designed more or less for my clients within my company. And it took a little bit of a hiatus as I moved from one side of Wisconsin, working on the other side, and then eventually moved to Colorado. So it took a hiatus there. Brought it back in 2018 because there was a need within the market. We don't talk about professional development enough within our industry. And so my focus is to promote professional development for EMS. And that's kind of the theme behind the magazine. So it started as a 20-page magazine. The biggest one I've had now is 68 pages. And about 25 recurring different columns, anything from management through mentorship, through operations and leadership, you name it. If it's anything that has to do with being an EMS director or the back office of an organization, I try to cover it. Quality assurance, finance, everything, human resource engagement, it's all there.
Right.
Well, and
I feel fortunate that I was able to contribute, one
absolutely.
time on mentorship. And I love that you do that, Tim, because like you said, it's not everywhere in the
Mhm.
industry. And there are some really, really great organizations. I think in any industry, right? This is not an EMS thing. This is not a healthcare thing. In
Yeah.
every industry, and we're seeing it, playing out in the world. There's good and there's not so good, and there's
Mhm.
best practices and there's things you probably shouldn't do again, right?
Yeah.
And so I think as we navigate those things, like finding our voice within the industry, it's important to self-reflect. It's important to share, and I think it's important to share your journey. And I appreciate you sharing your journey with me today and with our listeners. So as we close out, I promised a tidbit of advice. You've been doing this for 18 years. You've navigated some of these waters. If you have to leave our audience with a tip, a call to action, what should they be doing as leaders today to develop their voice, strengthen their voice, find that confidence that they need to make a difference in the industry? What would you leave them with?
Start. Just start. Do something. Reach out to someone or reach out to me. I'm glad to help. I'm not an expert. I think I'm a little bit more humble than maybe I should be sometimes. And but start. If you want to write something, send me it, and I'll look through it and publish it, and help to get your name out there. Where do you want to be? Where do you want your career to go? And I think that's something that I've focused on a lot with me. Does it hurt my personal side of my life? Yeah, it hurts the personal side more than it probably should, and I don't put as much attention there as I should, and I'm guilty of that. So I'm very professionally focused. But that has also helped me get to where I am today. So
Yeah,
it's a sacrifice, and something that I'm sure I will try to make up, in due time. But
sure.
it is a sacrifice.
Right.
But you have to start somewhere, and
Well,
start with those connections, and reach out, try to figure out where you want to go, and that journey may change a number of times along the way, but you've got to start somewhere.
right. Thank you, Tim. So I think that's great sound advice, that you just have to do it. And in very typical, again, caregiver form,
Mhm.
humble and always, that word sacrifice resonates really strong. And I've used the word resonate 3 times while we're talking. I love words. And when you say things like sacrifice, that's something that EMS people are comfortable with. They're comfortable with the concept that I have to do this to get that. And what I'm hearing you say, and what I think we're both very passionate about, is you have to do something to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So you have to take that action, and start is a great action, right? Thank you so much, Tim, for being with me today. Thank you for sharing your expertise, because you are an expert, and your knowledge
Thank
and
you.
your best practices with our industry and with those listening. Hope you'll join us again soon.
All right, thank you, Brett. I really appreciate it, and thank you, everyone. This too is a great starting point. We don't talk about this or push this enough. So start, just go do it.
Yep. Thanks, Tim. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.